Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another live stream on the History Live podcast. And tonight I'm joined by Dr. Robert M. Price. And tonight we're going to be discussing his. Oh, I'm muted. Okay. Uh, did you hear anything I said last second
Yes,
here?
I did. Yeah, you
Okay.
came through
Okay.
loud and clear.
Yeah. Yeah. So tonight we're discussing Bob's journey out of Christianity, how he became the scholar that he is now. And before we continue, um, yeah, I realized that I became muted while I was talking for a moment, and then I
Hmm,
unmuted it.
hmm.
So anyway, before we continue, again, the GoFundMe link is still up. I have it pinned in the live chat, and the link's also in the description below, and it will also be in the pinned comment. You can find the link specifically in the additional information box or area that's in the description below. Um, but it will also be in a pinned comment, which should be easier to find. And it's pinned in the live chat. We got a little bit more donations in, $910 out of 2,500. So we're getting closer.
Hmm.
So yeah, I just want to thank everybody for donating so far and everybody else that will donate in advance. It helps keep the show going and deal with expenses. So Bob, can you tell us when you left Christianity and what caused you to leave it?
Well, it's funny. This is kind of like what we talked about last night. Where do you draw the line in a process of evolution? Because I remember when I was in high school, I was a faithful member of our church and church youth group and witnessing and the whole thing. And I suddenly learned about apologetics from some chintzy film thing we saw in the youth group, and it showed a guy making the case. Oh yeah, this is how we know Jesus was real and he rose from the dead. I had never thought about that kind of thing before. I simply was in that intellectual context. Yeah, this is what we believe. And I knew that if you were witnessing to people trying to spread the faith, sometimes they had questions reflecting their skepticism. Why should I believe this? But it didn't penetrate with me. I just figure, well, of course, we're right. Christianity is right. So it's a question of finding the right answer for these poor folks. But the more so I thought, hey, this is great because if I study this stuff about the dating and accuracy of the Gospels and all that, that would really give me ammunition to use. It would be beneficial also to the people I witness to. It would help them accept the truth. Well, the more books I read by evangelical apologists like John Warwick Montgomery and F. Bruce, Josh McDowell, and J. and D. Anderson, a whole bunch of these guys, um, though I was avid and accepting of what they said. Hey, good, that sounds good. Never thought of that. But I had this conscience factor where I said, now, I don't want to make a fool of myself. I need to honestly consider, if I weren't inclined to believe this already, would these arguments be compelling to me? Because I don't want to just, say whatever might get somebody's attention. I need to know whether they are really legitimate arguments. And the more I got into that, at first, the first step away was to say, uh, in order to judge these things realistic and effective, I have to get into weighing probabilities. And if I weren't a believer, would I see it this way? And if I at first it was just, well, this might be a little weak. Maybe there's a better argument. Maybe I need to learn more about it, and so on. Why these scholars say what they do? But it dawned on me at one point that this was increasing my doubt more than reinforcing my faith. And by that, I don't mean yet that I was learning things that eroded my faith and made it seem weak or implausible. It was just simply the habit of mind where you're saying, now, how probable is this that the Gospels are based on eyewitness testimony? How would we know that really? That sort of thing. And I didn't really doubt that it was true, but I thought, what's the probability of that? And eventually, it wasn't long before I said, I am not just believing any longer, though I miss those days. But now I'm in the what somebody called the marshy bog of probabilities and so on. And it's hard to be dogmatic if you realize, some of these things are ambiguous, some can never be proved. And when you're in that mode, you're not really a believer anymore. And I found that caused me all kinds of doubt and torment. I wanted to be a good evangelical Christian and grow in the spirit and preach the word and all that stuff. But the more I did, the more it tormented me. Suppose I'm wrong about this. And should I believe it? And if it is true and I stop believing it, am I going to be damned? Oh man, that put me through the ringer on into college when I was involved in intervarsity Christian fellowship and that kind of thing. I wanted it to be true. It was an exciting sort of a thing. But if I really have to leave these things intellectually at arm's length, what am I doing? Is this the kind of peace that passes understanding that I'm telling people Christ can give them? I don't have that anymore. And so apologetics, by introducing probabilistic consideration of theories, which of course all scholars have to do, that really eroded my faith. And it wasn't yet that I felt like, there's nothing to this. The arguments are bad. No, it was even when I thought they were pretty good, I thought, can I really be sure of this? Can anybody? So the pure faith thing was out eventually. And so I don't know if my doubts fueled my zeal for suppressing them or whatever, but the time came when I had graduated college and was going to Gordon Conwell Seminary, just not for the ministry, but just taking all the courses in New Testament I could. And they were taught by evangelical scholars, and they were real scholars and knew their stuff. But they were all conservative Christians. And I finally came to the point of saying, I just don't think this is viable. I remember in particular one advanced seminar thing we had where it was all about hermeneutics, biblical authority. How do you get from the ancient beliefs and so forth and ancient conditions addressed by New Testament ethics to their application in the modern world? How can you get blood out of the stone or whatever the heck it is with these ancient documents that are not readily applicable? And I thought, this is just a mind game. If this were as true as we like to advertise it as being, it wouldn't be this difficult. Now, of course, most people don't even notice that, and it's not because they're stupid, but they're just not curious about that stuff, and it's working well enough for them. Even Clark Pennock, who I became friends with a few years later, he's in my opinion, was long gone now. He was a really intellectually responsible apologist, and I always give him credit for this. He said, look, you can't know this, and that's why we use the word believe. And so what are you just telling yourself what you want to hear? He said, no, it's it's like a working hypothesis that seems to me to be the most effective and authentic way of dealing with life. It might not be true, but I'm staking my future and my life on this. It seems to be true, and I'm open minded. And he would change his mind on some things. Very honest guy. But I guess at the same time, the Christian life seemed to me more and more illusory. All the rhetoric of how Christ will change your life and you'll be filled with the Spirit. Is that really so? I mean, I'm trying, but it just doesn't seem to stack up to the glowing impression we try to give people. And so it seemed to me less and less secure. I didn't dislike it. I didn't think it was malicious or anything, but I just thought I'm kind of at sea here and I don't see how I can be responsible and just pretend that it's all okay. And then I guess I took the next step and thought, I started reading theologians and scholars that I was always sort of told, don't waste your time with that. These guys all have naturalistic presuppositions. They're circular arguments that, well, there's no supernatural, there's no miracles. And that's how we know the Bible is filled with legends. And I would go with the C.S. Lewis excuse. Hey, that's circular. You've already made up your mind that that there are no miracles like a resurrection from the dead or multiplying the loaves and fishes. So naturally, when you read a story about that, you're going to think it's bogus, but you got to really look at the evidence. Well, I looked into what David Hume and others actually said, and I thought, I think the apologists don't quite get what they're saying. And I just felt, and the more I learned about New Testament criticism, I thought, geez, this is nowhere near as secure as they think. And I just thought that it's not possible to have a scholarly conscience and just believe the party line because you'd like to. And it wasn't that I thought that Christianity was oppressive or bad or anything, but then in the later stages of this, to where I am now, I began to think: is there anything um, what's the word I want? Well, idealist metaphysics. It doesn't make any sense to say that there are non-material spiritual beings in reality. What would that mean? It seems like sort of a contradiction in terms. And so I thought, I can't say this is any more than mythology. And then the longer I examined this, and this is even more true today, I began to think of all the naive things that otherwise very intelligent people say about praying for this and that. Surely you've got enough experience here to know that these claims are grossly inflated. You pray for something confidently, claim it, and if you ask these things believing that you receive them, you will move mountains and all that stuff. And I thought, well, it's obvious that that doesn't always happen. And so you have this little dance believers do. They say, well, I thought this was the best thing for me, so I asked God for it, but didn't turn out. So I guess he knew better than I did. Well, then you're kind of an agnostic. Then you're saying certainty is not really um, the right way to go because it's presumptuous. I mean, if you think about it, God would have to know better whether this is a mistake. So how can you pray in confidence? And all the stuff people say about how uh, they make claims about divine providence that fall through. How do you not see this? There's always this bunch of excuses that finally it's like linguistic or whatever, analytic philosophy. What is actually being claimed here? Or like Flu's parable of the garden or whatever it was he called it. These explorers are going through a jungle, and there's this sort of relatively bare patch that it looks like it's not quite as wild in its growth. And so one of the explorers says, well, it looks like somebody's kept a garden here. And the other guy says, well, I wouldn't say that. I mean, surely it would be better kept than this if it was a garden. And so they go back and forth. And the guy that insists it's a garden, he says, well, suppose we camp out here and see what happens. Maybe the gardener will show up and that'll settle it. Well, they do stay there for a few days, but there's never any evidence of anybody showing up. And I mean, it could be, but you never see this guy. And it's not really well enough tailored and designed and all that. And so the guy that insists there is a gardener, he's made it meaningless. And finally, his friend says, look, you're telling me that this is a kept garden, but that there's no real difference in the way it would look if there was no garden. So what is it you're really saying here? It's just gibberish, ultimately. It's as if you said, boy, it's rainy today, but it's also the sun is shining bright. What? I understand both of the things you're saying, but you're claiming they're both true at the same time. I don't know what you're talking about. This just doesn't make any sense. But believers do that. They'll go back from one foot to the other and say whatever they have to maintain the illusion. And like when Franklin Graham has these commercials on TV where he says, you can know your salvation, pray this prayer with me. God, I believe Jesus was your son and he rose from the dead. And I think, on what possible basis do you claim to know this? Well, of course, he's just believing it for emotional reasons. And that's just grossly irresponsible intellectually. And then it got worse as I began to examine. I got a PhD in systematic theology. And I still find it all really very fascinating. But doing that, and the more I looked into it, the more I began to think, none of this really makes sense. Predestination and free will, how can they both be true? Why did the fall of the human race occur? Couldn't God have created beings who would spontaneously do the right thing? I mean, why did he make us susceptible to sin and so forth? Or the Trinity. What is it you're supposed to believe? When, oh yes, I'm a Trinitarian. Could you explain to me in what sense the three are one? And people give you analogies for that, they just don't make sense. Or the Bible, it's the authoritative word of God. Of course, it seems to contradict itself, but we can always kind of fiddle around with that and re-explain things. But gee, we're not supposed to do that, because the authoritative sense of Scripture is the apparent sense. We don't want to start allegorizing it until you say, oh, geez, it looks like Paul and James don't agree here. I bet, if James had it to say over again, he'd say, oh, Paul is right. What? And the theories of the atonement. Jesus died for your sins. What do you mean? How could his death to pay the debt for real sinners? What are you talking about? It's not like paying for your friend's parking ticket or something. And the more I looked into it, the more I thought this stuff is just sloganeering. And that didn't make me despise religious people. though I do have a problem with media evangelists. But I began to think, in a sense, the Gnostics were right that you can't expect everybody to come to the realization of this, that the religion is man made, that it's not really a description of reality, but it is good for those who believe it. It can be anyway. And I thought this is like Gnosticism, because the true Gnostics, the pneumatics, they said ordinary Judaism, Christianity, they're really creations of these fallen angels who are really inculcating worship of themselves because they did create the religions. And so you're really worshiping angels if you're believing this is literally true, but it's better than despair and chaos. I know better that it is a scheme. So I am more enlightened, like my fellow enlightened people, but I don't look down on people that can't see it because they're like the sukikoi, the natural ones as opposed to the spiritual ones. They're doing the best they can, and their religion, whatever it is making them better people. I'm not going to rock the boat. I'm not going to try to deprive them of their faith, but I think I know better. And I figured, well, I still do love the Bible, and there's a lot of great teaching in the Bible. Some of it I can't quite buy. And then I thought, I don't know if I can still call myself a Christian just because I see wisdom like in the Gospels, because I think to be a Christian means you are accepting Jesus as your Lord, as they say. But I'm not doing that. I just find that I agree with Jesus as he's described in the stories a good bit of the time, but that's not saying, yeah, Jesus is Lord. It's more like saying, I think that guy Plato really had a clear head on some of these things, but that doesn't make me a disciple of Plato. So I eventually figured, I guess I'm not a Christian, like Joseph Campbell. I'm not really anything, though I love all the religions. They're fascinating. They're a kind of art. They're noble and beautiful creations of the human spirit, but they're not what they're cracked up to be. And that's okay. It's like it's kind of disappointing once you come to that position initially. It's like what Buddhists say about saying this world is samsara. It's a veil of tears. It's just a bunch of illusions. We need to get rid of that and just attain enlightenment, nirvana. And later Buddhists said, I think you kind of mixed up here. The world seems to be so disappointing and such a trial because you're expecting it to be more than it is. Now it's kind of an illusion, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have a kind of beauty. You mustn't expect too much out of it, and then you'll appreciate it for what it is. And that's the way I feel about religion. I'm not a believer anymore, but I love this stuff and want to study it and so forth. So I feel like I've kind of transcended it, not because I'm some kind of a genius, but I just sort of eventually untied the various knots and felt like that I love the Christian tradition, but I guess I just don't feel a part of it anymore. So I'm not anti-Christian. I really don't like these militant atheists who are just making fools of themselves by just attacking what they once believed. And I'll just finish this rant with this. A Protestant sociologist and philosopher, Max Shaler, he was one of the pioneers of the sociology of knowledge. He said that there's two kinds of former believers. There are apostates who have fallen from their faith and henceforth are warring against it, sort of taking revenge on it for having been deceived by it. But that's pure negativism. The other kind is the convert. You found your first faith, your first position not to be viable. It didn't prove out. But what do? You look for something better. You're not fixated still. You're not fighting the same battle, just changing sides. You're leaving the stadium and finding something else to do. And that, I think, is a healthy minded way of looking at it. So my skeptical and atheist pals, they're okay with me. My evangelical apologist friends, I do have them. They're okay with me. I like that approach. Will there be any eternal repercussions? I can't believe in stuff like hell. That just seems obviously childish scare tactics. It can't really be true. It retards moral motivation. That can't be true. Just like some creed that promotes hatred. That can't be right. So I don't think there's any fear anymore. What if I'm wrong? You can get if you were once a believer and you're beset by doubts, you're still enough of a believer deep down to say, we're taking an awful risk, Vader. That suppose I'm wrong about this and I'm going to hell. It's like you still believe it enough to be afraid of that. But when you finally say, no, that's just a neurosis. That's just the past whispering to you. You got reasons for not believing this. Stick to it. But there's no reason to hate people. And so I feel free of it. And life is more meaningful and rich to me than ever. And I love religion and religious people, but I just am no longer on either of the teams.
So we got some super chat questions. Philuscanus, I hope I pronounced that right. Thank you for your super chat. What lost manuscript would you both like to see turn up? I guess I'll go first on that one. A full text of the first Gospel of Thomas, the first version.
I think, but for me, it would be either the Gospel according to the Hebrews or Papias's exposition of the oracles of our Lord. I would love to see either of those. And who knows? Maybe they'll discover them. Not impossible. I mean, they're discovering stuff all the time.
Crimson90, thank you for your super chat. Just dropped $25 on the GoFundMe. Thanks for everything. Well, thank you very much, Crimson. I appreciate it. Philuscanus again. Thank you for your super chat. What is it about the story of Jesus Christ that is so powerful and has endured almost 2,000 years?
Well, Jesus is depicted as a kind of moral Superman, a fighter against a religious establishment that stifles innovation. I mean, that much seems to be true, whether there was a Jesus or not. This figure we find there presents a great challenge. And it's not that he's just a miracle worker. You might as well be reading a comic book if that's all you're interested in. And of course, I read comic books, so I'm not putting anybody down there. But I think he's just a great figure. And there is, let me see if I can find this quick. In Albert Schweitzer's Quest of the Historical Jesus, there's this great passage. Let's see.
Is it the passage about Jesus ends up looking like the person of anybody else that tries to reconstruct them?
Well, that's great too, but it's this thing about Yeah, okay, here it is, right at the end of the book. Well, the last couple of paragraphs. It is a good thing that the true historical Jesus should overthrow the modern Jesus, should rise up against the modern spirit, and send upon earth not peace, but a sword. He was not teacher, not a casuist. He was an imperious ruler. It was because he was so in his inmost being that he could think of himself as the Son of Man. That was only the temporally conditioned expression of the fact that he was an authoritative ruler. The names in which men expressed their recognition of him as such, Messiah, Son of Man, Son of God, have become for us historical parables. We can find no designation which expresses what he is for us. He comes to us as one unknown, without a name, as of old by the lakeside he came to those men who knew him not. He speaks to us the same word, follow thou me, and sets us to the tasks which he has to fulfill for our time. He commands, and to those who obey him, whether they be wise or simple, he will reveal himself in the toils, the conflicts, the sufferings which they shall pass through in his fellowship. And as an ineffable mystery, they shall learn in their own experience who he is. I really think that's great. And it comes from a guy that lived up to that. He was this intellectual elite. He's a scholar of Bach. He traveled around Europe repairing old organs so they could play Bach the way it was intended, and so forth. And he was the toast of the town. And he was some kind of believer. And he said, okay, I've lived about half my life for myself, and it's been very, very enriching. But now I have to follow the summons of Jesus to take up my cross and put down my life for him. And so what did he do? He got a degree as a medical doctor and applied as a missionary to go to French Equatorial Africa. And in the heart of the jungle, he oversaw the construction in the middle of nowhere of the very first hospital these people had ever seen. They were ridden and racked with horrible diseases and plagues. And by himself, basically, he constructed this hospital and saved all these lives and so on. And he did it because he felt summoned by Jesus in the narrative. That to me is powerful. And I think that, yeah, it's not like, I shouldn't say this, but it's not like just reading the life of Pythagoras, who was great. But there's something about this that really can touch you and affect you. That's not religious belief to me, but it's something better. And there is this undeniable draw for many of us. And that's not good enough for churches usually, but it seems to me that's that kind of appeal that the character has accounts for the his continuing appeal 2,000 years later, and it survives even uncertainty as to whether he ever existed. It just doesn't really matter. The text says what it says, and if it impacts you and it registers, well, that's a moment of clarity. And if the Jesus figure does that, that's well worth paying attention to. Sorry about that. I'm sermonizing like I used to when I was a pastor.
Oh, it's no problem. We got another super chat from Philuscanus again. Thank you for the super chat. What is the meaning of John 21:25? Why is it there?
The Johannine appendix, right? Let's see. Here we go. Almost have it. Uh, okay. Yeah, this is the conclusion. Now, there are also many other things that Jesus did. Were every one of them to be written, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written, which is sort of tantalizing, even if you're just a fan of New Testament criticism. But I kind of think that what that signifies is not that, I've told you a bunch of things, but I got a million of them, as Jimmy Durante used to say. No, he probably didn't. This, I think, actually implies if I knew any more, I would tell you. But this is it. So I guess I'm just suspicious, but it's like a replay of the original ending of the book, because it's like a paraphrase of chapter 20, verses 30 and following. Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Well, somebody added chapter 21 to deal with some business and then just tried to reproduce the original ending, and just in paraphrase. But I think it's just saying, oh, yeah, you think this is impressive? There's loads more where that came from, but I'm not going to tell you. So I think it's kind of big talk, but it's also kind of like the beginning of Luke, in fact, where he says, oh, yeah, many people have undertaken to write up what I'm about to tell you, but I decided to, do the job right. And so that's what you're going to get. Where did they get these stories? The beloved disciple, and who was that? It's very, very iffy. It's all floating in a kind of a vacuum because it's very difficult to believe any of these stories. It's like the principle of analogy. Can you really picture a guy multiplying loaves and fish to feed thousands of people, and all they've got is a can of tuna and a package of crackers? No, I can just about believe that some faith healer has juiced up somebody who was feeling down, but somebody walking on water, come on. The apologists that say, oh yes, these stories were passed down by eyewitnesses. Wait a minute, you actually think these guys saw Jesus defying gravity? What sort of a fantasy world are you swimming around in? Things like this don't happen. And you just can't take it seriously, and nobody would unless they were catechized to believe it. And so this kind of claim, oh yeah, you think this was big? I got all kinds of others. Yeah, sure you do. But I think that is his point. Saying there's more where this came from, but this ought to be enough to do it, to hook you. No, I'm afraid not.
We got another super chat. Philuscana said, thank you for yet another super chat. Do you think Gnosticism was inspired by ancient Egyptian religions such as the Syzygies being in pairs, like Osiris plus Isis, Yahweh, Asherah, and the Ogdud?
I don't know. There certainly are reasons to think that Egyptian religion was one of the sources for it, but it's kind of like Christianity per se. It's like an embarrassment of riches. You can find parallels. I mean, certainly plain old Christianity must be heavily influenced by the Osiris religion. And Gnosticism would it's easy to see how that, like the examples you mentioned, you can well imagine that they derive that, or the Last Supper, the body and blood, bread and wine. That sounds like the Osiris religion. There's a whole lot of parallels there. And Gnosticism would be another one. But there's so many types of Gnosticism, even within the Nag Hammadi library, where you've got the Sethians and Valentinians and other ones that they were all debating with each other and condemning each other and so forth. So who knows? But it's quite likely what you say is true, and that it did come in a significant measure from traditional Egyptian religion.
And just to correct myself, I think it was pronounced Ogdode and not Ogdude, but anyway. What led you to come to the conclusion that Jesus likely did not exist as a historical figure?
Well, the thing that really broke the camel's back there was I did a bunch of research, reading a bunch of scholars who tried to show that this or that or the other gospel story looks like a rewrite of an Old Testament story about Elijah or Moses or Joshua. And there were several such books. John Dominic Crossan does that, and Thomas L. Brody and Randall Helms. And after reading a bunch of these and taking notes, I wasn't convinced by everything they said, because it's not that clear. Even if it's true, it's hard to prove it. But with many of these stories, it seemed to me the most reasonable explanation. Yeah, these are rewrites of the Old Testament and of Homer and so on. And by the end of the thing, I realized virtually every story in the Gospels, and a lot of them in Acts, seem to be, they would make loads of sense as rewrites of Hebrew scripture. And I thought, now, wait a minute, what does that mean? Why is there no mundane, biographical, genuinely historical material in here? I mean, miracles are attributed to some of the Caesars and all that, but that's just was Muhammad. What is it? Could Muhammad move a mountain, or was that just PR and Jesus Christ Superstar? Yeah, sure, they had some of that stuff, but there's also plenty of objective historical stuff that ties these figures into world history. But with Jesus, it all seems self-contained, except insofar that it looks like rewrites of the Old Testament. And like there's nothing but that. And so I thought, this has got to mean that he's a literary character all the way down. And so I can't prove that, but I'm not certain about it. But that moved me across the line to say, I'm afraid I think this is the most likely possibility. Who knows, right? And wouldn't take much to, if they could discover it, to prove there was a Jesus, but nobody's found anything yet. And so I think if there was one, why would he have been totally buried like this in literary allusions and all that? In fact, you can do the same thing with Moses with form criticism. You can show how virtually all the Moses stories were told to legitimate some place name or personal name, or some ritual or practice. And by time, it's like Moses slept here. So I doubt seriously that there was ever a Moses. The same thing occurs with Muhammad and the Buddha. I never would have thought that, but it just seems to me that with Jesus, you're probably dealing with purely literary creation. Who knows? But, of course, I love this story from Clarence Darrow, a great agnostic and skeptic. his views are well known, and somebody asked him, Mr. Darrow, suppose you shuffled off and found yourself in heaven with a circle of apostles and prophets around you. And they say, well, Mr. Darrow, looks like you were wrong. What do you got to say for yourself now? And Darrow said, well, I would say, gentlemen, I was mistaken. Yeah, that's the way I feel. May be wrong, but I'm not staking anything on this. I'm not trying to get people to believe in mythicism or anything. What do I care? It's just an intriguing subject to me. And that's what finally pushed me over the edge. Not just mythical parallels, a dying and rising God. I mean, that's almost totally devastating. But on top of that, that all these stories appeared to be Elijah and Moses stories, rewritten with different names changed and all that. That was too much for me. I said, okay, I guess I'm a mythicist. And boy, is it fascinating, all of this stuff.
Scanis, thank you for another super chat. Jacob, why the original Gospel of Thomas? That's a good question. To see if there's anything that's not there from the manuscript evidence of the first edition that's in the Oxyrhynchus Papyri and in the Pseudo-Clementine recognitions, so-called Pseudo-Clementine recognitions quotations of it. I suspected that that contains most of it, if not all of it. But in case there's anything missing, I would like to have the original.
Well, how about the Q document, if there was one? Boy, I'd love to get a hold of that.
Yeah, the difference with the first edition of Thomas is there is evidence and attestation of it, but there's nothing for Q.
Right.
But yeah, that would be interesting if it turned out to exist. Thomas Payne, thank you for your super chat. 1, you are awesome. 2, what artifacts would you want to find answer questions, tunes you have, or fret may change the paradigm?
Well, I've always thought if they, the Oxyrhynchus Papyri, there were all kinds of things like bills and receipts and fragments of letters and just trash they used to stuff these alligators once they cured them. Well, they decided to razor blade some of these things open to see what the heck they stuffed them with, and our first knowledge of the Gospel of Thomas came from that, because there were fragments of a larger document that turned out to be Thomas once they discovered the whole thing in 1945. Well, let's see. Yeah, I thought, suppose somebody found a bunch of papyri and found a letter from, let's say, a traveling businessman. I mean, there are such letters back then, usually pretty mundane. This guy's writing to his wife, how's everybody, how are the kids, and so on. Suppose in such a letter, somebody not trying to prove anything happened to say, while I was in Jerusalem, I had the opportunity to hear the popular Jesus of Nazareth dispensing his wisdom, an impressive man. Okay, to me, that would be the end of mythicism. I'd still think a lot of the stuff had been fabricated, but that would be enough to me to say, yeah, okay, I guess there was such a Jesus, at least some kind of rabbi or prophet or something. But, and maybe they will discover something like that, but so far, nothing. And so, but that's all it would take. It wouldn't be a vision or something that, I mean, that wouldn't prove anything anyway. I know people that claim there was this elderly lady that ran a used bookstore, and I bought some paperback from her, and I don't know how we got to talking, but she said that all of her relatives lived to be at least 100. And she prayed to Jesus that she too would live to be 100. And so one night, Jesus appeared to her and said, I've heard your prayer. You will outlast 100. And the woman said, would you put that in writing? And he did. He wrote her a note and I guess signed it Jesus Christ. This woman she wasn't wearing a straitjacket. She didn't appear to be a lunatic. But of course, I think she was hallucinating or dreaming or something like that. But that wouldn't be veridical. Suppose you think you saw Jesus. Well, people are thinking they see people all the time and they're hallucinating. So that wouldn't really tell me anything, but just a scrap of papyrus that happened to mention Jesus. So nobody's trying to prove anything. I would say that ought to do it. We'd still have to ask, well, okay, how much of the stuff in the Gospels did he really say or do? But that would settle that issue. And if somebody finds it, I will be the first to say, gentlemen, I was mistaken.
I've got to show this one. This was kind of hilarious. It's from James Valiant. You are the Buddha, Bob.
Oh boy, I doubt that seriously. I appreciate it, Jim. Thanks.
All right. Philuscanas, thank you for another super chat. What do you think about the Cathars and the Bogomils?
Well, they apparently were medieval Gnostics, and the big issue there for me is, had they rediscovered or reinvented ancient Gnosticism? It's impossible to be sure, because it's easily believable that they had scriptures available, just like the library of Saint Pachomius that contained the Nag Hammadi texts. Well, maybe there were other caches of these things, and people read them and said, hey, this sounds pretty good to me. But on the other hand, all religions have parallels because everybody has the same mental faculties. Everybody has the same brains, and everybody has the same questions about life. How do I know what's right and wrong? Will there be anything after death? What is the truth? All sorts of things. And you don't need to know that some people on the other side of the world also said this. It's just inevitable that people are going to say, hey, yeah, wait a minute. We say God created the world. He's completely good and righteous. But how on earth can you justify that given all the stuff that happens? All Hitler and all this stuff. Everybody's going to sooner or later start asking this. And it's no surprise that some people are going to come up with the Gnostic theodicy. Hey, maybe the world wasn't created by an absolutely perfect, righteous God. Maybe there is one, but it was some inferior being that created it. Yeah, that would explain it. It's not a happy prospect, but that would kind of fit the facts. So I wouldn't be surprised if they just reinvented the wheel. Another thing that makes me think that is, the Cathars, the pure ones, they committed ritual suicide by starvation. At least the elite did. That when they felt they had become among the perfect, they would say, well, I really have nothing more to learn and to do. I have achieved it. So so long, folks. And they just starve themselves to death to free the spirit and all that. Well, it so happens that over in India, the Jainists came up with the same thing. This ritual suicide. Now, did the Cathars have any idea about Jainism or vice versa? No. They just had the same sort of issues, the same sort of questions, and came up with the same kind of stuff. Same thing with reincarnation. The ancient Greeks had it, the Hindus had it, and so on. They could have borrowed it one from the other. I mean, there was plenty of trade going on. It wasn't like they were on another planet. And if you're saying again theodicy, how is there any justice in this world? Look at these people that never have a chance, of children that die from starvation. How is this just? Where is there going to be some recompense? Oh, maybe they'll get their innings in another life. Yeah, surely that's got to be it. Well, sooner or later, that's going to occur to various people around the world. So they didn't necessarily get it from each other. It's not that tough to come up with the stuff. So that, to me, is the question that is raised in crystal clarity by comparing the medieval Gnostics with the ancient ones. And it doesn't help solve the problem, but it sure does raise the problem. Did they reinvent the wheel? Or did they rediscover the wheel? Hey, these guys, I never thought of this, but they did. Or maybe you thought of it and then later, well, son of a gun, what do you know? They were smart enough too. But don't know. All the more interesting, though.
We got a few more super chats. Phyllis Scanis, thank you for another super chat. Do you think as religiosity and Bible literacy continues its sharp decline, will the field of biblical studies die off in 50 or 100 years?
It depends. Like, I think in graduate school, it will continue because religion is never, I mean, you're going to have Islamic zealots forever. No matter how much you bomb the Shiites in Iran, you're never going to get rid of fanatical religious zealotry. So it'll always be important to understand religion as best you can. And religiosity is pretty resilient, given the stakes of meaninglessness on the one hand or confidence on the other. I don't understand things now, but when I get to heaven, I will. That is so attractive to people that I find it hard to imagine that religion will ever pass away. But even if and when it does, there'll be a lot of people doing the autopsy. Like when we study Greek mythology, say, wow, these people believed in this and that and the other thing. Well, the less people believe in it, I suspect they'll be more interested in how on earth did people believe this. So I don't think, and skeptics and atheists, they love studying religion. I found out when I was working for the Council for Secular Humanism, these people could not get enough of Bible stuff. Partly, I guess, because they had abandoned it and thought it was oppressive. And they thought, what's the real deal about this? But I was just amazed at how interested they were. Again and again, different groups. So I would find it hard to believe that it'll, even if everybody became secularists, I still think you would have a lot of focus on studying religion, and there'd be more objectivity to it as well. And because it's easier, once you're a bit distanced from it, to understand it better.
All right, let's go on to the next super chat. Thomas Payne, thank you for your super chat. Is there anything like a parallel Bible that compares the Bible not to different translations, but instead to other myths?
There is there's an old book, I think, called Myths and Deceptions of the Bible that probably suffers from a lack of the greater knowledge we have of all these faiths. But as I recall, this book does say You want to talk about a world flood and a guy surviving in an ark? Well, which one do you want to read first? Because there's several of them. So there are comparative mythology books like that. I can't really come up with a more recent one, but I'm sure there are. That one might be worth looking up on Amazon. I believe it's Myths and Deceptions of the Bible, which sounds like kind of an axe grinding thing, but it has helpful data in it. And I'm sure there'd be other similar works. I just can't think of them offhand. But that is very illuminating to find out that Pythagoras had a story where he saved the lives of loads of fish that were caught. And he told he was a vegetarian, and he says to the fisherman, "Hey, if I can tell you how many fish there are here, would you let them go? And I'll pay you the equivalent amount." Sure, go ahead. And of course, he knew as a philosopher somehow. That sounds a lot like John 21. When hey, you catch anything? No, not so far. Well, try over there. And then there's some more of them than they can deal with, and they haul the nets in. And while Jesus is reacquainting with himself with the disciples after being killed, they I've always found this so hilarious. Peter's talking to Jesus, and the thing about my denying you, I was just kidding. Well, while they're having this heart to heart, somebody is counting the fish, because the evangelist says there were 153 of them, which happened to be one of the favorite numbers of Pythagoras. So it must have come from that. But I've always thought it was hilariously funny. Hey, you guys go talk to the resurrected Son of God. I got more important stuff to do here. I'm going to count the fish. Anyway, yeah, there are. Another book. I do remember this. A comparative source book for the study of the Gospels, I think, by David Dungan, Dungan, and David Cartledge. I could have some of the words in the title juggled. Is it a source book for comparative study of the Gospels, but with those two names, I'm sure the book's still available. That does a great job. It says, here's the gospel passage, and here's some rabbinical, and here's some Apollonius of Tyana parallels, and it's real eye-opening.
All right, let's get to the next super chat. Philuscanis, thank you for another super chat. Did some of the Old Testament authors believe in monism and non-duality? Isaiah 45:7.
Let's see. Let's see here.
Yeah, that's the passage about God creating evil and good, making peace and creating evil.
I form light and create darkness. I make well-being and create calamity. I am Yahweh who does all these things. I don't think I tell you what I do think is a biblical intimation of pantheism is where in 1 Corinthians it says, now we see in a glass darkly, but then face to face. And it suddenly hit me one day, a glass, a looking glass, a mirror. They had sort of poor mirrors back then, just a polished metal. And so you don't get a really accurate reflection of yourself. But then one day we'll see face to face. You mean in a better mirror? Whose face do you see in a mirror? Yours. They're trying to say that It says, we shall know as we are known. Is that because it's God on both sides of it? I don't know. I mean, it doesn't go on to explain that, but you could say that it's like one of these things that Tillich talks about. He says the Bible is always implying metaphysical questions that it doesn't venture to answer. That's left up to us. Like in Romans 8, I think it is, where it says, he who searches the hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, for something about our prayers that are inarticulate groanings. And Tillich says, you see this? It's like the Spirit is on both ends of the communication here. He's inspiring the prayer and he's hearing the prayer. And Tillich said, well, what does that mean? Is that implying some sort of pantheism or monism? Could be. You never know. I mean, they open doors a crack and never wind up going through them. But for this, I tend to think this is like the pre-moralization of the idea of holiness in the Rudolf Otto sense, that we think of God being holy, meaning that he's morally perfect. Could God sin? It's a moot point. He never would sin. It's never going to happen because of his character. No, before that, as Otto documented a good bit, the holy meant the holy, WHOLLY, the holy other. That the mysterium tremendum, this overwhelming, threatening sense of the greatness, the utter alien character of God, that implies, like when Isaiah sees Adonai in the temple, he says, woe is me, I am undone, for I have seen the Lord of hosts. What's he complaining about? His very being is threatened and minimized to nothing because he now understands what the capital R real is. As a dream when one awakes, thou sweepest men away, one of the psalmists says. That's getting pretty close to some sort of ultimate being, but that meant God was beyond good and evil. He doesn't have duality. It's like holding your pet dog or cat responsible. Hey, Fido, it's about time you shaped up around here and pulled your weight. And while we're at it, let's talk about your college plans. What? You'd never do that outside of a Disney cartoon, right? Well, that's the way it is with God, as God says in Isaiah. As the heavens are high above the earth, so are my thoughts higher than yours. Whoa. You might as well just shut up about God. You can't possibly describe God or understand God. Any God concept you have is an idol. For your measly brain to contain it, it's got to be inferior to your brain. Is that the absolute spirit? No, of course not. Don't kid yourself. And so I think it was beyond good and evil that Isaiah has God talking about. But later on, you don't hear that kind of thing. They moralize God. And that's where you get Satan coming in. They borrowed that from Zoroastrianism. How do we explain the presence of evil? If you've just got God, that's a real puzzler. But if you have an anti-God, and the good God is not technically all powerful, well, that would explain things. And since a good God is going to be wiser, it's a safe bet he's going to win the struggle one day. but they were willing to say, it's better to believe that if God could eradicate evil, he would do it. So he must not be able to, but let's join him in the fight. But once that happened, then you get Satan, who used to be God's servant, become his enemy, because those Zoroastrians had a point. Maybe there's a negative God at work. Could it be Satan, like the church lady used to say? But you're right. These questions are raised if implicitly in this, and that's what's so great about theology. That you can do this artistic thing of creating these castles of dream and speculation, as long as you remember that's what they are. They're kind of offerings to God, if you want to put it that way. But you have to be humble and recognize a man's, what is it? Clint Eastwood say, a man's got to know his limitations. And that's nowhere more true than in theology.
All right, on to the next super chat. Crimson 90, thank you for your super chat. I love when you have Dr. Bob on. I love his diatribes and tangents. Gets the brain juices flowing. Dr. Bob is the best. Well, thank you, Crimson.
Oh, thanks. It gets my brain juices flowing. I have a long day and I'm tired until I come on the show, and then whoa, it's very invigorating. So I'm glad you enjoy it.
Awesome. Thomas Payne, thank you for another super chat. Top 5 comic book movies, favorite characters.
Oh boy. Captain America, the First Avenger, the 1989 Batman, Batman versus Superman, the Avengers, and the Avengers Age of Ultron, I would say, are my top 5, but there are real good ones beyond that. Too many to count, and very profound. There is real moral and philosophical depth in the comic book superheroes, some of them that really teach important lessons. The comic books are the modern mythology. And they're not just funny books. And I just think they're great. Like, if you have worries about AI, take a look at the Age of Ultron. You won't sleep at night about AI after that. It's great stuff. As to my favorite characters, I always think Superman, Spider-Man, Captain America, and Batman. Those would be my absolute favorites, but there's so many others that compete with them. In fact, I've got, well, you can probably see, though the light is not very good in here. I've lost a bulb here. I've got superheroes all over the place, my little totems. Recently found that Freud had his office festooned with little idols and statues of pagan gods. I thought, hey, okay, he had his own action figure collection.
That's great.
Oh, boy.
All right. Philuscanos, thank you for another super chat. Why did religion shift from gods to individuals like Muhammad, Jesus, and Buddha?
I think probably because people felt clueless. They figured there was some kind of great power, but how do I know what pleases him? I don't want to incur his or her or its wrath. Is there an expert that could tell me? And if somebody says, hey, come to think of it, I had a revelation. The angel Gabriel or whoever appeared to me, and I can tell you, I can answer your questions. It's like, oh man, great. I got a million of them. Tell me this, tell me that. I suspect it's like you had someone who thought they were an expert and could give you satisfactory answers. And of course, they're charlatans that recognize that yearning as an opportunity to rip people off, but I suspect that's why prophets became so important. I need to know these things. Can anybody tell me? Oh, Prince Siddhartha, you say you can? Well, let it go. Let's hear it. So I'm guessing that's why, rather than leaving it to my own stupid speculations. How do I know anything? But maybe this guy's on to something. Tell me what you got.
All right. Constellation Pegasus, thank you for your super chat. One of these days, a geologist needs to come on. Ring woodite release cannot flood the entire Earth. A sudden release in a short time would boil the oceans. Noah's flood has so many problems. Only logic puts it at fantasy.
Oh yeah, you are not kidding. Robert A. Moore, who I've never met but used to correspond with, this guy wrote a treatise that appeared as an issue of creation evolution, which I think the American Humanist Association put out. And it's called The Impossible Voyage of Noah's Ark. And it and there's a cartoon on the cover that shows the big ark with huge holes in it. And it just shows how, from every standpoint, this is impossible. It's just ridiculous. And of course, that's because of the modern world. Like, they didn't have to ask, well, geez, how did Noah get koala bears and kangaroos and polar bears and all that in the ark? He didn't know there were such things. The storytellers didn't know that. And so it just didn't occur to them. They didn't know anything about this. So it's like a fairy tale. But every different culture seems to have some version of it, because they all probably suffered from devastating floods at one time or another all over the earth. But the individual stories are just utterly impossible, and the terrible gymnastics that creationists submit to try to save face for this stuff. It is so tragic. But yeah, it's just indefensible. That really galls me every time I see one of these TV ads for the Ark Encounter. You mean you're promoting educating these kids by bribing them with this huge wooden playground with animals and stuff in there? You're catechizing them into believing this pre-scientific nonsense. That is just scurrilous. You're just training people in ignorance and superstition. And it's too bad. I can't believe there are people still doing that. Ask them, bring up some of these points. Where would you have the food for all these animals on the ark? How would you dispose of the waste? How would you stop the animals from eating each other? How could you possibly have enough pens and cages and different environments? Oh, well, God must have changed natural law, or maybe he had brainiacs shrink ray and reduced them in size so he could have them like little toys filling there. That's some imagination, but no.
It's like imagining that Ant-Man gave them the ability to shrink, or just at will.
God could do anything. Yeah, that doesn't mean he has done everything any idiot says he did. Anything's possible, they say, but that doesn't mean anything is probable. Sheesh. Oh boy.
We got one more super chat, assuming no more comes in. Ked 566, thank you for your super chat. Are there any ancient literary sources of any kind that can tie the ancient gods of the region to the Tower of Babel during the dividing of the people?
There are Greek myths where the giants try to storm Mount Olympus, or to storm heaven, but I guess it's the same thing. And they did it by uprooting mountains and piling them up. And they were going to assault heaven. And that does seem to be a missing piece in the Tower of Babel thing, because Jehovah is threatened. He goes down to do some reconnaissance, and he says, "Holy mackerel! I never thought these monkeys would be capable of something like this. There's no limit to what they can do. We got to nip this in the bud, fellow deities." Oh, I got it. Let's make them all speak different languages. Hey, Caleb, hand me that hammer. And he's what good's a bologna sandwich going to do you? What are you talking about? And then they just couldn't communicate. Oh, forget it. We might as well just leave and can't live together anymore. But why is God threatened? It might be because the builders of the tower were trying to scale heaven. Who knows? But that does kind of throw light on the thing. And I forget exactly where that's mentioned, but in one of these great books, like by Robert Graves about Greek mythology, it's probably in there. And there's a whole bunch of parallels between Greek mythology and the Bible to an amazing degree. Like the Gerasene demoniac is Polyphemus the Cyclops, and the demon-possessed pigs are Odysseus's men turned into pigs by Circe, and one thing after another. The Trojan War, the sacrifice of Iphigenia is just like that of the daughter of Jephthah. And Pandora's box is like Eve, and so on and so on and so on. It's obvious they're all in the same neighborhood and just hear slightly different versions. Like when you hear jokes. Oh, yeah, I've heard that one before. Different names, but yeah, that's what happened in oral transmission. But there is great stuff like that. And a great book on that by Robert Graves, same guy, and Raphael Patai. It's called Hebrew Myths, the Book of Genesis. And it really is great for plugging in these neighboring Mesopotamian and Greek and Roman parallels that were likely just cross-fertilizing each other. But that's a terrific book.
So I just want to remind everybody real quick before we close, the link to the GoFundMe will be in the description below and in the pinned comment, as well as the links to Bob Price's books and his Substack page. And with that being said, Bob, thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Hello, viewers. Thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and/or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.